Uh, on the panel, Dr. Suranjali Tandon, Assistant Professor at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Dr. Vera Helena Thorstensen, Head at the Center for Global Trade and Investment at FGV Brazil. Ms. Tamina Sharif, who is Regional Director for South Asia at CJIAR. Ms. Hyoni Ban, who is the Chief for Social Policy at UNICEF India. Moderator, over to you.
Thank you, Janvi. And we're going to be getting down to brass tacks now after that really exciting interlude that we had. So good afternoon and welcome to the last session for this day on women-led development. And in this session, Agents of Change, we will be setting out to find out the interlinkages between climate, food, and gender inequality. Before we begin this discussion, it is important to underline some important facts. Women are the most impacted by the climate crisis. Women are key to food security, and the climate crisis and the food security crisis further deepen gender inequality. And women's participation and leadership are crucial for building climate resilience and food resilience. So we are going to be discussing how the planning, development and funding of policies on food and climate can be gender responsive, and how women-led development and the G20 can play a role in achieving this. Our speakers today bring a wealth of experience, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion, which we will later open to the audience. Let me just begin. Suranjali, I'm going to start with you. Okay, so the climate crisis is known to impact women a lot more given their roles and responsibilities and, of course, cultural norms. At the same time, women are often the first responders in community responses to the climate crisis and extreme weather events. And, of course, the intensity and frequency of those are likely to rise. So how can we put women-led development at the heart of climate policies? And how can we mobilize innovative financing instruments in climate and disaster resilience to focus on women?
Thanks, Helena. This is a lot less interesting than the previous session. But I think the only positive that I see coming out of climate change is that we're beginning to talk about the role of gender that's been left behind and communities that have been left behind in many, many years of macroeconomics. We've gone to school and been agnostic to what growth really means for different segments of the economy. I think it's a fundamental change is required on how we talk about macroeconomics, and I think G20 is ideal for this. It is to see how much of the public budgets are going towards gender. It's also talking about, what is the role of women across healthcare, because you will see transition to minerals or to sectors which are new. I think it's also an opportunity to say where are the jobs. In the earlier session, one of the speakers alluded to the fact that there is scope for employment in renewables, but it still remains undertapped. And I think we need to reimagine jobs as well. On your question of finance, I think it's quite interesting. Finance is dominated by men, but what we're seeing now is that there is a paradigm shift in terms of disclosures, in terms of regulations, which compel companies to say what they're doing in terms of gender diversity. So for example, you have thematic investment based on ESG, which allows for scaling up finance for climate as well as taking into account adequate gender representation. I think there is need for critical thinking on infrastructure. I think infrastructure is something that is a focus of the government, of many governments, and this infrastructure provides the support system for women to go out to work, for women to participate in different kinds of opportunities. And I think the G20 could come together to talk about funding infrastructure, which is also useful for women to go out and work and participate. So that's my short answer.
And a quick follow-up, are we seeing some of these financing instruments being utilized?
Yes, absolutely. So for example, you know, within the G20, there is conversation of impact investment. And impact investment has picked up over the last couple of years. It basically delivers change in the form of education of women. It you know, looks at skilling. And so you're looking at social impact bonds and development impact bonds, which have, especially in India, gained traction and are now looking to scale.
Vera, I'd like to turn to you next. Suranjali just mentioned how we need to reimagine jobs. And of course, the green transition presents an opportunity for women to address some of the social, cultural, and also the structural barriers that have prevented their workforce participation. And what we need is women leaders to be entrepreneurs, to be innovators in the green sector. And yet, despite that, less than 1/3 of the global sustainable energy workforce is made of women. So how can we promote women-led development and promote entrepreneurship in green sectors that also addresses formal and informal workforce?
Well, first of all, good night, perhaps already. First, let me thank the organizer of this event. And exactly almost 50 years ago, I was, as a young professor academic that I am, in the Conference of Women of the United Nations Conference on Women in Mexico City. At that time, all the heads of the delegations are men. And I said, what's going on? I was in the academic side event. And I said, what's going on? There's no woman. Yes, the women not ready, they are not ready to get the discussion going on. So, and my question is, and I spent all my life in academic years and traveling a lot and working in international institutions. And the point is, what have changed? And then, because I am an economist and I like numbers, I went to see the numbers before coming to India. And in the case of Brazil, the numbers are not so nice, in the sense that, yes, we have half of the population, yes, we have university persons that are, 60% are, that get the end of the university are women, but then, if you go to the salaries, the difference are huge. If you go to the participation of women in the higher administration, it's a funny thing, we get a number that is magic, 30% or less. So my point is how to get out of this 30% and to a better number. If you go to the representative in politics in Brazil, it's terrible also, in the sense that we have marvelous politicians, but the number are not significant. And in all this, the issue, one that stuck me most was the issue of violence. Somebody said about this. I went through the numbers. Can you imagine that in Brazil we have 800,000 rapes by year? Can you imagine a society that are trying to change when you have this kind of violence, the numbers of violence? And we have in Brazil everything that you need. You have a structured minister of women and all these secretaries, and you have a new law now that's putting pressure on salaries. But even so, there is no progress in the sense that what I said is the famous 30 around number, right? And so the point is what the G20 and T20 and all the people that are dealing with, how they can, yes, there are many cases of success, but what I've been trying to do is to understand as an academic the failure, the process of failure, and why you are not getting out of this kind of point. If you go to the area of environment and climate, you know, Brazil is completely involved with the big issue, and I went through the numbers. And I discovered that the area that woman has a big representation is what we call familiar food, that is the family agriculture. That, you know, it's important, we call a lot about nutrition. You cannot talk about rice and corn, but you have to talk about other other plants and so on. And what I discovered, nice, 80% of the workers are women in this familiar agriculture. Then I went through and got the numbers of financing, credits, less than 1% of total amount of the budget going to agriculture in Brazil. So what we are doing is we have a huge exportation, we have a huge numbers, you are leaders in many of issues, but if you go, what the big issues are, certainly meat, all kinds of meat, and soybeans and corn and so on. You are lagging behind in basic food, that is rice and beans in Brazil. So it's really challenging to see how to tackle all this issue. And in the area of trade, my area is trade. There's a lot of talking about bioeconomy, biodiversity, and so on. Look, women are the basis of all this trade issue. And but the point is how to organize, how to go. Can you imagine going through the Amazon, the river, and once a week taking the crop and convincing the people, all the learning process, to use this material as a basis for cosmetics and for exportation and so on. So there's a huge amount of work to be done. And the point is, what I might suggest, and I went with this, I like numbers. I like the facts. And I went through the numbers of World Bank before coming here and the OECD and so on. Look, they are not the same numbers. If you go through the methodology, how they get the numbers, they are not talking the same thing. So can you imagine in our life now to see as an academic, to see how the difference exists, and we need to talk the same concepts. What is that you are measuring, and what is the main problem, right? So this for me is the most, and more than the statistics, you have to build with indicators to see how the countries are going to do and what they are doing. And my last word will be that what a very famous woman said in Brazil, talking about gender and women and so on, and she said, look, all the reference of men when they talk about the gender issue is not so nice, like in this room. They are taught that they have sympathy for the women clothes, the women issue. And a Supreme Court, the leader of the Brazil said, look, I don't want your sympathy, I want my rights. And that's the point, how to deal with it. We have rights, they are not being accomplished because of the legal system or the political system of the culture. And how to change this is a big issue, is the big issue, right?
I agree with you. Numbers are very compelling. And would you also say that, especially when we talk about climate, food, or any aspect of development, data collection is such an important part of it, and women are often left out of it. Are there ways to address this issue?
Certainly. Look again, go to the numbers and see that all this issue, you can see that the gap, huge gap of gender. And how to take with it education. And I listened before, and I fully agree, it is to change the mentality of the family. If you have a family that is, like in Brazil we call in Spanish, the macho man, that's the way. We have still a society, this is completely developed in the sense of my place. And I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. And the talk all the time is this. You know, now we are being pressured to have women in the high direction of the firm and so on. But look, she's not ready. So the society has still a lot of pressure to do this. And my point is, what you can do for international organizations to deal with is, yes, you have to give, invent programs, to give opportunities, to give incentives, but more than this, we need to invent systems of punishment. If the country, if the firm, if that organ of the government is not doing this, what to be in a punish? What political punishment or financial partners. You have, if not, we're not going to change. As I said before, after 50 years of the first Women Conference, we still have a ceiling. How to get out of this ceiling? It's too low.
Femina, I'd like to turn to you. Vera, in fact, talked about women's role in agriculture, and around the world, and especially in the developing world, women are responsible for collecting food and fuel for families. They are responsible for more than 50% of the world's food production. If we look at developing countries and the current food climate and debt crisis, how can we address women's concerns in this and also address the issue of nutrition security for all, and especially women and girls?
Thanks for the question. I think it's an excellent question. I want to sort of draw everybody's attention to the recent report, the IPCC Assessment Summative Report. It was, and I think it provides a lot of really good context for answering your question. So this report came out just a couple of weeks ago. It sort of highlighted the fact that there's been climate change, widespread effects of climate change, including loss and damages, and I think it's really important that we think about that in the context of developing countries. And that there's widespread adverse effects, but the good news is that there's a variety of options, feasible options that are open to us. But these have to be implemented within a context of climate justice. And I think that notion of climate justice is really important because of the disproportionate effect that it's having on the developing world and on women as farmers in the developing world, both consumers and producers. And so if we think about the fact that, here's a few facts for you. So half of the world's population lives in regions that are highly vulnerable to climate change. And in the last decade, we've had deaths from floods, droughts, and storms that are 15 times higher in highly vulnerable regions. On top of which, the risks to global food security are increasing, both in terms of production and in terms of the nutritive value of the food. So even if we can figure out how to grow enough food for 10 billion people, it's not going to be nutritionally sound enough for us. And so this is going to involve the requirement for choices that are rooted in a diversity of value systems, a diversity of knowledge systems. So while I represent a science organization, we are also going to have to start to think very strongly about traditional knowledge systems and traditional areas where we can pull that knowledge from. And that's the only way, really, that we're going to become able to develop locally appropriate and socially acceptable solutions. So this was sort of some of the key points of this report. What I would want to talk about specifically, to come to your question, is a couple of different examples of work that the CGIAR is doing around this, but work that is that still needs to be scaled appropriately, that still needs to be adjusted for appropriate contexts in the different countries. So for example, there is gender responsive breeding that we are doing. So if we go right back to the basics of how do you pick rice varieties or corn varieties or wheat varieties or varieties of any crops that we're growing, we have to be able to do that based on gender norms. And so there are a number of different product profiles that have been developed with the help of women farmers who are providing input into what those product profiles look like, what they want to see in a particular variety. There's a great project that's happening in Odisha actually right now around gender-based mechanization. So we don't often think about the ins and outs of actually having to produce food, but when you think about the fact that the vast majority of farmers operate on a hectare of land or less, 50% or more of them are women, and then we hand them these giant harvesters and tillers and seeders to operate, and it doesn't suit them, much like the example that we had of the medical instruments that don't suit. So there's a fantastic program that's going on in Odisha that's actually looking at how do you recreate mechanization implements to help women that suit their body type and what they need to do. But it's a very small project, and I'll get to that. And then the other one that I want to draw attention to is around nutrition, and which is around nutrition-dense crops and production of nutrition-dense crops. And here, there's lots of solutions. There's solutions around biotechnology, around climate-smart varieties, traditional varieties. I want to give a shout out here to the government of India around their millets initiative, and the fact that it has been broadened to include other traditional crops, teff, sorghum, barley, all of these that are coming back and are going to be really important for nutrition. But there's a great little project, again, that's happening in Kenya, and it's a school feeding project. So what they've done is they've worked with a group of farmers, a group of schools, and the local government, and they've actually figured out how to get farmers to grow food that will be introduced into the school feeding program. It creates a diversity of diets. It creates a new aspect of income for the farmers. And it also grows their ability their confidence about growing new crops. So moving away from sort of the big three crops into a greater variety of crops that creates a diversity of nutrition and the diversity that's on your plate. But the point that I'll come to is, so these are all, great little examples, and I shouldn't say they're little. They're significant projects, but they're not nearly at the kind of scale and scope that we need in order to actually be able to make significant impact on climate change. I do want to draw the attention to the idea that there is an entrenched inequality in the agri-food system, not just in the developing world, around the world. And that's specifically for, innovation. These sort of innovations that I've just been talking about, they're not necessarily adequately targeting climate resilience. They're not necessarily being scaled and being bundled in a way that makes sense for women or that is useful to women and the way that they need to use them. And they're not being diffused at the pace or the scale that is necessary to actually make an impact. And so there's a need to really start to think about how do we get women to co-develop and co-design these solutions. How do we get them, how do we allow them, how do we create more spaces for women farmers, for women producers, for women scientists to come into that space and actually be able to shape that research base. And actually be able to shape the research base that governments are then able to draw on to create their policies. And without being able to introduce women into that ability to shape that research base, we're going to continue to create policies that don't quite meet the mark. They don't quite take into account women's, the full need of the variety of women that are involved in the agri-food sector. So the last thing I would say is, I've got one more point that I'd like to make, which is, so one of the other things that we're doing at CGIAR, we recognized that even over our 50-year history, our work with over 3,000 partners around the world has not been sufficient. It has been far from sufficient for today's needs. And so we're actually introducing an engagement framework that will fundamentally shift the way that we engage with our partners, starting from the very basis of developing a co-creation and a co-development aspect to that. And we're hoping that that will fundamentally change the type of research that we develop, the type of research that we are able to make available. And finally, the last thing I would say, and we were having a great conversation about this morning, which is that, in the first panel made a really good point about minding the gap or closing the gap. And I would say that, when it comes to thinking about how do we transform food systems, we can focus on women farmers, we can focus on women producers. We have to also focus on women researchers, women scientists. We have to focus on women leaders in areas of agriculture, climate, environment. I sort of jokingly, but with an ounce of seriousness, said, I've lost count of the number of times that as a woman working in agriculture in South Asia, the number of times I've walked into a room for a meeting and I've been the only woman in leadership. And yet these are the people who are creating the policies and setting the agenda for how we transform our agri-food system. And so we really need to think twice about that too, and where is that representation coming from?
What is the one thing that needs to change in our food systems to make nutritious food available for all, including women and girls?
Oh, so I would say that there's no one silver bullet. It's a whole host of technologies. It's a whole host of opportunities that exist. But I do think, but I would say that the science exists. The science exists right now. There are opportunities in biofortified crops, in biofortification of nutrients, in creating a diversity of diets. There's been a number of different interventions. But again, it's an issue of scale, and then it's an issue of regulatory opportunities. So for example, you know, to bring a crop to fruition, a biofortified crop to fruition, takes a tremendous regulatory pathway that is not often clean-cut, easy to maneuver, easy to get through. Even in terms of the ability to scale very high, you know, diverse diets, or, you know, there's this lovely idea of these kitchen gardens. Well, a kitchen garden is not going to solve the kind of large-scale issues of diversity of diet that we're facing. And so it is about putting in policies and finance that will allow us to scale appropriately, even existing technologies today.
Hyun-hee, to add to some of what Tamina has talked about, and women play a vital role in building climate-friendly food systems and in building food security in households and in communities. Yet, women do not have land rights. Less than 15%, I was surprised by this figure, less than 15% of women in the world have agricultural land ownership. How can we support women farmers to adapt to climate change, and also to promote crop diversity, which is important, as she also brought out, while increasing access to land for women farmers?
Thank you so much. And let me first take the opportunity to thank ORF T20 Secretariat, Ministry of External Affairs for putting at the center SDG 5 at the midpoint of the 2030 agenda. We talk about rescuing SDGs, and I really think that after COVID, climate, conflicts, the world's solution lies in women empowerment and women-led development. And as UNICEF, we operate in 190 countries. We just celebrated 75th year of our establishment in UNICEF, and in India over 70 years. And we work across health, nutrition, education, water and sanitation and protection, which we talked about the issues of GBV, as well as social protection. And we firsthand know that child rights and women rights go hand in hand. And so by investing in women-led development and entrepreneurship, I really think that we can have a wider impact and solve a lot of the world's problem. And let me just focus a little bit on grassroots women's leadership, because we talked a lot about very, very promising models. 1975, India started the Integrated Child Development Scheme, which is globally the largest early child care development program. We know the role of the Anganwadi, the child care workers that are females, in really transforming child and maternal nutrition. We also have been privileged to support the polio eradication, where the female vaccinators, the grassroots leaders, were able to eradicate polio. ODF-free, open defecation-free village. We have the women leaders who actually took charge. So it's very, very critical to not only look at top-down solutions, but we need to have catalytic solutions coming from the ground. And I want to turn to why this issue matters, having women in entrepreneurships. Because what I see is that these promising models that have sustained over time, we can convert these women leaders into women entrepreneurs in the climate resilient food systems and supply chain. I take an example of the National Rural Livelihood Mission of India, where we have now, I believe, and you can correct me wrong, there's about 12 million self-help group members, and around 90% are women. And this is across all of the states of India. And they have been focused on financial inclusion and livelihood and income generation activities, but more and more they're actually generating livelihood through farming, sustainable farming. They have, as you mentioned, backyard gardens, they have organic farming, and now if we can equip them with the technology, the markets around climate smart crop techniques. And we talk about millets, we talk about maize, and why does this matter? children or women bear the brunt of the adverse effects of climate change. We talk about extreme weather events, drought, the heat waves, the floods, cyclones that not only hit India, but all over the world, crop failure, loss of livelihoods. And this is why we need them to be involved in those kind of, have access to the technology. And third, I've seen in the midday meal scheme, I've met self-help group members from Kerala, Kutumba, that are actually involved in producing, the nutrient mix that goes to the childcare facilities, Angawadi centers. They can actually have a role in food quality and safety. I've seen that the income generated from the self-help group members in even Jharkhand, they're very empowered leaders. They can actually ensure that incomes are actually invested into child health and nutrition and education. And this is why I mentioned this, because we had the conversation about investing in childcare infrastructure. The reason is, the first year of life of a child, there are about 1,000 connections of the neurons. And you have rapid brain development, but the environment also matters. The nutrition, the health, the protection that you environ. It is really investing in the cognitive capital, brain power of not only your family, your community, it's good for businesses, it's good for the economy. So I think this I just wanted to say. And then because we don't have a lot of time, I just want to make that pitch because I see the clock going. In order to do this, I think we need to really address the issue of care economy. So policies, P. The first policy of order for G20 leadership is to really consider investing. I read 2% of GDP investment in childcare can actually, in OECD countries, have a return up to, I think, 6% in terms of the employment generation. In emerging markets, more than 3% of employment generation. And if you talk about the women labor force in the employment, it's much higher. And if you're offered childcare for women, you can actually generate 3 trillion back into the global GDP. You can actually generate 43 million jobs in the care economy, childcare work. So this is very powerful. And I think this, because we're talking about climate change, should be a core pillar of a very inclusive shock responsive social protection. We talked about disaster risk resilience. Women should be at the front line. But if we talk about just transition to the green, the digital, the care economy, we need to ensure care is at the heart of a social protection system. And given I'm from the UN, I'm going to talk about the Global Accelerator Program launched by the UN Secretary General in September 2021. Which talks about this, and a big focus is youth. I think we talked about women, but we need to also talk of female youth, the young adolescent girls, in order for them to actually transition, have a safety net. While people lose their jobs, they need time to upskill, right, in the new green technology. So I think this is critical. And then third is financing. In addition to my colleague here, I think gender assessment of national state budgets to see what we need to invest in terms of empowering women in the climate resilient food systems. Secondly is, I think that we should consider a climate innovation fund which really empowers women entrepreneurs in this sector. So let me stop here because time is running out. I decided to make those points and then over to you.
Thank you, Hyun-hee, and I'm glad that you addressed the question of innovative financing as well, and of course putting the agenda of care economy front and center to this. I'm going to ask all of you this one question, which is if you can share perhaps 2 or 3 or even one policy recommendation to the G20 for women to be agents of change in climate and food systems. Let's start with you, Tamina.
Sure. Yeah, okay, there we go. So yeah, I was reflecting on this idea of women as agents of change in agri-food. I would offer up two recommendations. One would be about drawing on an equitable evidence base. So again, to the point around making sure that women-focused research and their perspectives are included into the evidence base that you draw on to make policies, regardless of what those policies are. And then my second one would be around an increased commitment to advancing agriculture research and technology and scaling existing innovations. And I think there's a couple of things. It's not just about increasing the amount of money, but there's a number of other pieces that can be there. There's things around climate finance, obviously, but it's more around coordinated policies, around international cooperation, around ecosystem stewardship, and around inclusive governance. And these are really the essentials. You know, there are things like there needs to be the right incentives set up so that countries are able to promote their production and their commercialization for low-income countries. And I think also going back to the example that I had of the school feeding program in Kenya, I think to answer some of the discussion around nutrition and nutrition density, there is an opportunity to create nutrition-sensitive social protection programs that can sort of encourage that kind of full circle opportunity and create a more nutrition-dense and nutritionally diverse opportunity for families and communities that don't have that opportunity right now.
Vera? Recommendations.
I have a list of them. Let me choose two. Yes. Take a look on the digital education. Look, my area is education, right? And the question is how to use these instruments to put some order in the heads of the youth. As astonishing issue for me is to see the youth of my country, young people, girls and boys, lost in what they are going to do, how this world is so complicated. And, you know, the impact of internet is so huge, the games and all the challenges and so on, that I spend more time giving classes and giving speeches and so on, and then they come to me and said, what can I do with my life? In the sense that what you did with your life and how to be an international person and so on, and to have all this view. So the important point is, if you want to have the participation of women to be increased, you have to go to the education issue and use the digital era to change this. See the models, look at the models, what kind of women they have in the digital area. Not so nice leaders as we thought. So how to improve the digital education to use this also to talk about gender participation, leadership, and all the issues that we discuss. And the second point for me, look, let us face reality. You are living in a system where multilateral organizations are really important. But look at them. They are all in crisis. You are living in a world without leadership of international organizations. We need to change the system, right? How to discuss this. And it's not only, can we think about a war of what we talk about these issues here, how to transform the multilateral organizations. Can we have much more women in the United Nations and Security Council and so on? I love what Christine Lagarde said, the world is led by testosterone. Let's put other kind of hormones in the discussion. The hate, this spirit of doing war and so on is not the way of living of women, and this can be used. Look to the other organizations, IMF, stuck in the crisis of debt. Look at the WHO, the fight of United States and China. Are you accepting that we're going to live in a decoupled world with different blocks and systems? No, right? So we have to see that the recommendation is, can we have more space for women? And can we have a chance to change this system? So my recommendation is this: go to the numbers, see what's going on wrong with the plan that men made to give space for women. Look at the problems, look at the questions again, and see if you do not change the international system, the culture, you are not going to change anything. You are not going to stuck in the same place. Next, in 50 years from now, you are going to have the same meetings and discussing the same thing.
I hope not.
Hope not.
Yeah, so I have three very quickly. So to begin with, I think the uncomfortable question needs to be asked and discussed on why is there a pay gap. I think the elephant needs to be spoken of, and I think any sort of research which is also then discussed on reasons and causes will put issues out in the open and perhaps can be addressed then through setting of minimum standards. There's already been a reference in the previous panel of some kinds of minimum standards existing, but perhaps a floor on what this wage needs to be and the gap needs to dissipate. That conversation perhaps needs to begin within G20. I think trade is a very important area, and that's your area of expertise. We've seen that in India, women are employed in sectors such as textile, tea and coffee, which have been sadly adversely affected over the last couple of years. And I think the question needs to be asked on, is there need for new industrial and trade policy which takes care of the gender issue as well? And I think third, which comes out of all the previous panels, is that this is a normative change. And are we going to look at laws? Because there has to be a top-down approach. It takes very long for norms to evolve organically and to change thinking. Is it that the legal systems need to change and evolve? We've already seen that in finance, as I said, through ESG-based investment, where investors are asking companies, like, what are you doing in terms of recruitment policies? And do we need to see that in various other legal codes that exist across countries? And perhaps the External Affairs Ministry is well suited to discuss these issues. So that's my recommendation. Thank you.
So I'd like to summarize in 4 P's. Great, robust public policy, focus on childcare, affordable quality childcare as a center of an inclusive social protection system. It's about just transition into green digital care economy. 85% of the world's women labor force is in the informal sector. They need protection. They need time to upskill, transition from low-tech to high-tech. Second is programs. Quality programs that are scalable, proven, that can be scaled up, expanded as a platform to turn grassroots women leaders that I've talked about, like the self-help group members, into women entrepreneurs. They need to be equipped with knowledge, technology. In the green sector, they need irrigation technology. They need to use drones, satellites, whatever it is, the modern technology, capital, market. Third is partnership. We talked about the role of not only government, but civil society as well as private sector for the financing. So this is critical. And then fourth, and this is why we're here, political will. So we have already seen under the India G20 presidency, women-led development will be in the action plan of the development working group, which I was told is the heart and soul of the development issues of G20 and beyond. So I think we have a chance. I mean, as UNICEF, we have been supporting different working groups, health working group, education working group, W20, Empower 20, Urban 20, the DR working group, and all of these trends I'm seeing an echoing theme that women, once you put women in the center, you will solve these global issues. So I would urge all of us, because you are decision makers in your role, please let it go up into the Leadership Summit. So over to you.
Okay, packed in a lot of ideas in very little time, and I'm going to turn to the audience now. Yes, Charu, please go. So maybe we can take 2 questions, another after us.
So a lot of strands that came together, I'm going to just string them, and a lot of thoughts came up. So I'll be responding to everyone. You mentioned entrepreneurs, so agripreneurs I'd like to call them. So if we create agripreneurs, especially women farmers with small holdings, as a practice, wouldn't it be important to bring them as part of an active practitioner when creating any such models around them? For a simple reason, that they have local practices, sustainable local practices and local wisdom, which is acclimatized around the land holdings which they have been working on for several years. So I'll just give an example. For example, in Uttarakhand, there is village after village, 170 odd villages or so, where women farmers who have a lot of pride in their work, and they practice these, for example, twin crop. With rice, they will make millet embankments. So what are they doing? At the same time, it's crop diversity, it's hunger, nutrition. I mean, there's a lot of things that they are supporting, which is climate friendly. Another example, tomatoes with marigolds for pest control. Now, a lot of these practices are practiced with them. They know better. They could actually teach us many things about their land. Yes, then bring technology on top of it, then bring market linkages such that their enterprise, their produce doesn't go waste and they can earn, it can be sustainable. The other part is contract farming. So when we bring in contract farming, we do two things. We bring in capital and we bring in capacity building for the people whose holdings we are doing contract farming with.
I would love to see women who are in the industry that you're in contributing digital content online, especially towards nutrition, to what they are doing, so that we can see them. I hear about farmers, I see farmers, but if I were to Google anything today, which was the same for scientists, women in STEM, we were never there, but today, if you Google, you will find all of us. But if I go to farmers, especially young people, generation, YouTube, Instagram, all those things, that's where they go for inspiration. And I don't see these women speaking up about issues that are relevant to us and what are they doing, unless I go to a farm, which is impossible, unless I live in a farm.
Do you want to take those on?
Maybe I'll just start with a comment. To your point, I think we have to recognize that farmers are the world's first entrepreneurs, right? So they may be agripreneurs, but they are entrepreneurs. But to your point, yes, I do agree. There are a number of sort of community-based organizations where women farmers are organizing themselves. They are drawing on shared knowledge. And there are, and one of the things I think are most important is that ability to draw on traditional knowledge, right? So reaching back into knowing what are what we call orphan crops or traditional crops that can be brought forward that are naturally climate resilient, that naturally don't require a lot of water. They do well in drought. And also sort of that ability to do diversified land ownings, right? So rice fish systems, rice duck fish systems, marigold and tomato systems. You're absolutely right. I think the next step in that is around, in the same way that we would help any entrepreneur to scale and to get faster and more efficient at the work that they were doing in any industry, we have to take those innovations that exist right now to remove the drudgery out of farm work right now. And that looks like finding varieties that are easier to plant, that require less water to plant. That includes finding mechanics and mechanization that allows women to plant faster and more effectively. It's about finding the opportunities for us to allow them to scale and allow them to really make their entrepreneurship that much easier. And I think that's a key part of it. And it's not that the innovations don't exist, but they exist and they have been tested on very small scales. They now need to be scaled much larger, and then they will need to be adapted based on different agroecologies or based on different parts of the country or parts of the world that we exist in. That's the challenge that exists for us now, right?
Let me use it and so on. So it's a huge dilemma in how to use there's no internet over there. There's nothing. You have to go kind of a little community or lived community. And so it's amazing how because of the standardization that you have to follow and be sustainable and, be gender positive and so on. And this is a huge market for the industry and for the banks. So I'm working with banks and the firms that are producing this kind of, for juice, for cosmetics, and so on. And you have to think completely different. You have to think about gender, you have to think about financing, and get into the forest, and organize the extraction and so on, and distribution. So it's a big issue to work with. So it's a very different and challenging issue to go to the small farms. But I fully agree, property of land is another issue. To whom belongs the land? If it's a woman that's taking care, it's the one. And you can say the same for cities. Has the mother alone, with 5 children, without fathers, that's it. That's the reality of Brazil. The amount of young ladies with 5 children, young children, each of one from different parents. But the responsibility, that's their reality to take this. Without the help of without a home, we are going to deal with this, with the children, right? So, a lot of things to do.
Do you want to come in?
It says time is up. But echoing what you said, knowledge platforms, networks, critical for mentoring, to learn from one another, community of practice, and it's very important for women entrepreneurship. Digital economy is huge. There's an intersection, I think, great intersection among digital economy, care economy, and the agriculture sector. There's a huge business in agriculture sector. If we do right, I mean, there's huge jobs for youth, young people, women. So I think this is something that I just wanted to say, fully echo and agree to your points. Thank you.
Could I just add one more really quick point to your point around the use of the digital economy? And here again, I want to really call out the Government of India for their innovation in this. So earlier today, one of the opening comments made a comment about the UPI and the digital infrastructure that has been implemented across the country in the last 5 years. One of the things that we've really lauded and I think has been a huge sort of example for the rest of the world is what is called AgriStack. So the Ministry of Agriculture has now taken that digital infrastructure and built an agriculture stack on top of that is enabling all sorts of digital innovations for farmers at the most essential levels. And to your point around the digital economy and opening that up. So it's an incredibly innovative way to kind of build on top of infrastructure that the government is already investing in.
Thank you very much. This was a very rich discussion. I will not try to sum it up. That would take a very long time. I'm just going to thank each of our speakers for demonstrating to us how women-led development is the bedrock for climate and food resilient systems. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. I would like to invite Joint Secretary Naidu once more on stage to give away some tokens of our appreciation. And thank you to the audience for staying with us and being engaged. Coffee and tea is served. I'd like to invite Ms. Enam Gambhir now on stage to deliver the concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Janvi. Thank you to everyone. Really inspiring, very exciting discussions. I think especially the second session that we had was breathtaking. So congratulations to all the wonderful ladies who were here today. I think it's really difficult to say anything meaningful after all these amazing, inspiring words that we have heard. It was so clear today, so much work is happening, so much conviction exists, so much inspiration is there, and yet, as so many panelists said today, there is so much more to do. There is miles and miles to go. And I think, as I was thinking about, this question that several panelists posed, there's so much work to do, and there's, there is a lot to be done. I was really sort of thinking about what are those mindsets, those frameworks that are written with those mindsets that perhaps are not allowing the work and the conviction. We clearly saw there is no dearth of any conviction to do this amazing work of bringing the equality and gender equality. So what is really underpinning those mindsets that is preventing us from making progress faster? And I think I was thinking of a few questions that I think also emerged from what the panelists said. And I think it really boils down to questions about what we value the most in the society, in our lives. What do we care about? What is the way we engage with work, with earning a livelihood, with money, as also one of the panelists said? And what are the assumptions that we have about what is efficiency, productivity in an economy? And as we think about it, and as Bharatang was talking about coding, I was thinking, who wrote that code, right? That created economy on the basis of productivity is this and that and all of that. And if we just flip this a little bit and actually imagine if the 50% of humanity was represented and had an equal say in the decision-making bodies and quarters and all of that, what we would value the most, what would we care about the most, right? If the 50% of the humanity was represented and had an equal say, what would be the way in which we would engage with livelihood and money and the world that we live in? And let me also add here nature and environment and the cost or the lack of cost that we attach to it. And what would be our assumptions about productivity and efficiency and all of that? I think it might be very clear to us, right, that what is really those challenges in terms of the mindset that we need to change. And what is it that, that is the exercise that we need to do to reimagine those doctrines and those frameworks that would enable an equal say for the 50% of humanity on crucial global issues as well. And I think as we discuss some of these issues in forums like the G20, it's also very clear to us that we do have physically the resources to resolve so many of the global challenges that we are struggling to resolve: poverty, hunger, nutrition challenges, learning opportunities, one could even argue climate, energy, and all of that. So physically, we do have the resources to resolve all of these challenges. But we are still struggling. So maybe, possibly there are still some voices that are not as represented or do not have as much of an equal say in the decisions that we are taking collectively about resolving those. So I think, as we sort of go on with that thought also, in the work that we're doing in the international policy making, maybe the mantra should be more representation. Maybe it should be giving to those who might have been left behind in the past the lead in finding solutions. And I think maybe then we would find more resilient and more effective solutions which will actually matter on the ground. So inclusion, women-led development is really what we saw today is a mantra for finding solutions to all our problems and global issues that we are struggling with. So all the best to us with that hope. Thank you everyone for an amazing, amazing discussion. Thank you.
So thank you very much for being with us this afternoon and for remaining engaged. I think we can all agree that fantastic conversations, fantastic intervention, lots of food for thought, and this is a good time to now actually enjoy our evening, enjoy what dinner and the mealtime holds for us. But please join us for a cup of tea outside. And of course, then some of us have our plans, and others will explore the city, and still others will dine with me here. So let's see who those lucky ones are who are going to be with me at the end of the evening. Okay, till then, thank you very much once again, and see you tomorrow morning. Thank you.